maaari pong mapakiusapan ng mga bisita ngayong hapon, kung maaari umurong po kayo dito po sa harap para po maging close tayo. Ilang minuto magsisimula na po tayo. So kung maaari pong umurong po yung ibang mga nasa likod para po medyo compact po tayo dito sa gitna. Salamat po. Alam kong excited ang mga tao. Excited, maraming excitement sa likod. Mamaya-maya po ay matutugunan pa ang excitement na yan habang dinidiscuss natin itong libro tungkol sa false nostalgia sa martial law. Alright, sige, so may mga dumarating pa. Magandang hapon sa inyong lahat. Sige. Okay. So, kung maaari pong maupo na rin yung iba para po makapagsimula na tayo. Ayan. Okay. So, bilang panimula po, kasi alam niyo naman po lahat ng ating mga aktibidad, lalo na po pag kami ganitong pagtitipon, nagsisimula po ito sa pambansang awit. So, kung maaari pong tumayo ang lahat para po sa pambansang awit. Magsiupo na po ang lahat at muli magandang hapon po. At salamat po sa inyong pagdalo sa hapong ito para po sa ating palatuntunan. Gusto ko pong, I'd like to welcome everyone. I'd like to welcome our guests, especially those, some of our guests here are going to comment on the book. Welcome to everyone. Welcome to the students, especially yung mga hindi pa masyadong bihasa o nakakaalam tungkol sa martial law. Ngayon pong hapon, we have two main events. So the first is the launch of the book. The book is called The False Nostalgia, The Marcos Golden Age Myths and How to Debunk Them. This book is written by our very own faculty of the UP School of Economics, Professor Giancarlo, or JC, Punong Bayan. Poging-pogi, all right. The second event is the unveiling of a digital painting donated by one of our senior lecturers, Ms. Patricia Takay Coseteng. It's Patricia? All right. Now, I'd like to mention the fact that this auditorium also has some history regarding martial law. This has been a venue and witness of activities of similar themes in the past. But before I proceed, natito nga pala po sa script, I'd like to introduce myself. Nakalimutan na yun. Sa sobrang excitement ko, nakalimutan ko na ipakilala kung sino ako. Ako si Professor Ogie Ercenas. I used to teach at the School of Economics, but now I teach in UP Los Baños, and I'm the Director for Community Innovation Studies Center there also in Los Baños. I am a certified martial law baby. Nandun po ako sa EDSA. I know I don't look it, but matanda na po ako. So, nandun po ako sa EDSA noong napatalsik si Marcos. No? So, I have first-hand information tungkol sa nangyari doon. But of course, batang-bata pa ako noon. Ngayon, bata na lang. Wala na yung kadugtong. Itutuloy ko lang po yung pag-discuss. So, sabi ko nga po, ito pong auditorium na to, no? interestingly enough, dati po ang pangalan nito is the Diosdado Macapagal Auditorium. Now it's called just simply the Philippine Center for Economic Development or PCED Auditorium. Nagkaroon po dito ng mga ibang events noon, no? Particularly po nung 2016, naimbitahan po namin dito si Susan Kim po. Isa po siya sa mga kapatid na mga Kimpos na nung panahon po ng martial law, especially nung first quarter storm, ay sila po ilan dun sa magkakapatid po sila, puro po sila mga naaresto nung panahon na yon. Po kami dito noon ng forum also, ang tawag noon, alam ba ni Bongbong na nandito tayo ngayon? Kasi parang feeling ko nasasabotahe ito. Anyway, meron pong experiential forum noon 2016 on martial law, wherein we recreated yung barricada scene complete with the barbed wire. So it was very interesting at the time. It was sponsored by the Public Affairs Office of the School of Economics. Si Rose and I was the director of the Public Affairs at that time. We invited si Susan Kim po, no? And she talked about the experience of their family at the time also. And they wrote a book also about the experience of the siblings during martial law. So that was the first. Also in February 24 of 2017, exactly 6 years today, no, from today, there was a forum here also called The Relevance of the 1986 EDSA People Power Today. This was a discussion on the promises and successes in disappointments on the dictator's ouster and the restoration of constitutional democracy. At that time, then, hindi pa siya vice president noon, but Leni Robredo was here as one of the guests. I think she was also a panelist. I don't remember much. Nalatandaan ko lang po nagpa-picture taking kami noon eh. But at that time, no, that was 6 years ago. So, so dito po, you could say that hindi naman po, kumbaga, hindi stranger itong School of Economics when it comes to the discussion regarding martial law. Kanina po nung pinapanood ko yung naglo-loop na video tungkol doon sa mga kabataan na naniniwala ang martial law ay golden age. Hindi ko alam kung malulungkot ako o masusuka kasi parang ang off noon kasi estudyante ako, sabi ko nga nung mga panahon na yon. So ibang-iba doon sa pananaw nila. And so yung mga ganitong forums o mga ganitong pagtitipon, yung libro na sinulat ni JC o iba't ibang forums, I think ang kinakailangan sa ngayon. So let me just go through the book launch. So siguro po let's begin the book launch, no? And we can reminisce more later when there's a more informal interaction. So the book here is called False Nostalgia, The Marcos Golden Age, Myths and How to Debunk Them. Binasa ko siya kanina, mabilisan. And I must tell you that it's a really good read. It's easy to follow, and I hope students buy. Pwede bang i-photocopy din nila? Diba, bumili kayo kasi copyright. Kasi alam nyo naman ang gawain ng mga estudyante, bumibili ng isa, pinapa-photocopy sa 10. So, bumili kayo para naman masundan tong libro, para mainganyo naman si JC magsulat pa. Kasi yung libro, may mga tanong kasi, no? So, the way it's structured is there are questions, and then sinasagot ni JC. I'm sure may iba pang mga questions na hindi na nasama dito, so bumili po kayo para ibang questions ay sumunod dun sa susunod niyang libro. So, the release of the book is very timely as we commemorate the EDSA Revolution anniversary tomorrow. No? So, kung hindi niyo po alam, magtataka naman ako, hindi niyo alam, anniversary po ng EDSA Revolution bukas. I'm really excited. I've read some parts of the book. I'm excited to read the rest of the book. Today, we have the author to talk more about the book, and I'll just introduce JC to you. No, and let me just read something that I'm quoting. This is a quote from shameless plugging. This is lifted from the coffee table book of the School of Economics. Pwede nyo rin pong basahin, meron po sa labas. I quote, JC is a regular columnist in Rappler. This is the article written about JC. It's a regular columnist in Rappler where he writes incisive and information-based economics pieces. He is co-founder of Usapang Econ, a group of young economists popularizing economics for Filipinos. JC also co-hosts Usapang Econ podcast. His professional experiences include stints in the Securities and Exchange Commission, World Bank office in Manila, FEU Public Policy Center, and NEDA. JC is a graduate of the School of Economics. No? So he graduated summa cum laude, FYI, summa cum laude po, walang-wala. And class valedictorian, walang-wala talaga, from UPSE in 2009, and was awarded the Jose Encarnacion Jr. Award for Excellence in Economics and the Gerardo P. Sicat Award for Best Undergraduate Thesis. Walang-wala ho kasi talaga eh. So, pasensya na raw. So he continued his graduate studies here in UPSE and earned his MA in Economics in 2013, and then his PhD in 2021. Now he is, I think, one of the younger, hindi ka na yata youngest, no? Napalitan ka na recently, but he was once the youngest faculty of the UP School of Economics. So so he joined the UPSE faculty immediately after he finished his PhD. So to give us a more authoritative account about the book and to talk about the book, may I ask JC Punong Bayan on stage.
Good afternoon, everyone. Maraming salamat, Ogie, sa very generous introduction. And thank you to everyone for attending this afternoon's book launch. Alam natin merong pa-surprise holiday si President, pero you made it, so congratulations to all of you as well. Sige, so actually, prepared an article for Rappler today to discuss the book. And let me integrate that with my presentation this afternoon. So, ayan. So, today, Ateneo de Manila University Press, and we have the director of the Ateneo Press right here, Ma'am Karina Bolasco. Hello po, ma'am. Hello po. They are publishing my first ever book, False Nostalgia, The Marcos Golden Age Myths and How to Debunk Them. This is really the culmination of nearly 7 years' worth of research on martial law economics. Starting with my article, next slide please. Ay, sorry. Papindot na. So, ayan. So, actually, nagsimula itong lahat dun sa Rappler article ko, no? Entitled The Marcos Years, Marked Golden Age of the Philippine Economy, Look at the Data, where I discussed martial economics and pretty much just showed certain graphs that try to encapsulate what had happened during that time. Admittedly, it was only then, when I was already doing my PhD, that I paid rather close attention to the state of the Philippine economy in the 1970s and the 1980s. Before that, I actually had little inkling for economic history, believe it or not. Next slide. But I was really quite deeply struck by the huge disconnect between hard facts about the decline of the Philippine economy during martial law, as well as the conventional wisdom or delusion surrounding it. For instance, in 2016, some people were saying that the Philippines was the leader of Asia during martial law. That was a time when our economy was booming and life was easier. For the longest time, I had a vague notion that the economy was in the doldrums during martial law. But when I began poring over the datasets as well as the existing studies, I didn't realize how especially injurious that episode of economic history was. Next slide. So ito yung portion na may mga graphs tayo na konti na binaon, and these come from the book. So, for instance, even a cursory reading of the data will show you that we experienced the country's highest annual inflation rate of 50% in 1984. So just to give you an update, so inflation in January this year clocked in at 8.7%, and we're already complaining about that. Pero imagine an inflation rate of 50%. We once had that during 1984. So that represented a huge decline of the purchasing power of Filipinos and resulted in much economic hardships for millions of Filipinos. Next slide. And of course, the huge debt crisis that resulted in the accumulation of about 25 billion US dollars in external debt throughout the Marcos years from 1965 to 1985. So even if there was some economic growth happening, the important thing to note there is that it was debt-driven. So yung mga utang natin from outside of the country, these were used for different programs and projects. However, many of these proved to be inefficient and many were corrupted. Next slide. So all of these snowballed into the country's worst post-war recession or economic downturn. In 1984 and 1985, the economy shrank by a total of 14%. That's still larger than the decline owing to the COVID-19 pandemic, which clocked in at less than 10%. So even a pandemic parang couldn't beat the economic downturn because of a particularly bad regime or authoritarian rule. Next slide. So the crisis also manifested in the very dire labor market situation. So for example, if you look at the unemployment rate, so that doubled from 1972 until 1985. And underemployment, which includes people who have jobs but they need to earn more or they're dissatisfied with their current jobs, this affected easily a third of all people who were employed back in 1984. So you can see several spikes in the macroeconomic data around that time. Next slide. The job market was so bad that so many Filipinos chose to leave the country to find greener pastures, leaving behind their children and spurring the so-called OFW phenomenon. Next slide, please. Oops. Ayan. Sige pa, next. Isa pa. Ayan. So, at the same time, poverty also increased significantly during martial law. So, it spiked from around 50% to 60% in just a few years. Now, the poverty incidence rate is just about 20% or a little under that. That's still high, but a massive improvement already from what we had during the Marcos years. So just about every indicator that you can think of mirrored the economy's massive deterioration going into the 1980s. The Marcos years were definitely and objectively not the country's golden age, and that much is incontrovertible. But that only makes the spread of the golden age myths in the 2010s and 2020s, accelerated by social media algorithms, all the more frustrating. Next slide. So let me show you the table of contents of the book, False Nostalgia. So the way I organized this, and actually I got a lot of good suggestions from Ma'am Corina Bolasco in the initial stages of this book. So I categorized these golden age myths into three main categories. So the first one, the collection of myths purporting that the economy back then was some sort of carefree utopia. So from the time Bongbong Marcos ran for the vice presidency up to the 2022 campaign trail, we will be inundated with claims of varying levels of inaccuracy and, frankly, craziness. And false nostalgia is structured around these contemporary myths, ranging from the idea that we were the richest country in Asia during martial law, which is false. No public funds were spent for Imelda's hospitals, false. And Marcos Sr. invented Nutriban, which is also false. Next slide. Other myths include statements, for example, that we had the highest literacy rate in Asia, false, and nobody was poor, which is also false. So in general, if you listen only to the loyalists and read their posts on social media, you would easily think that martial law was nothing short of a carefree utopia. Next slide. So another category of golden age myths purport that after the Marcoses were ousted, things got even worse. And that doesn't jive with what we see in the data. So equally interesting is that kind of myth. And for example, if you read the social media post, some people would say that Filipinos' purchasing power fell after EDSA and not before, which is false. Unemployment skyrocketed to 66% because of EDSA, which is also false. Some people say the economy tanked after the Marcoses fled, false again, and Marcos added just $1 billion to the national debt, which is also false. So all these, of course, are petty attempts to tarnish the legacy of democratization brought about by the EDSA People Power Revolution nearly 37 years ago. Next slide. And the final category, and one of the more interesting ones actually, would be Golden Age myths that try to explain away the purported riches of the Marcoses themselves, what you might call gold-related Golden Age myths. So depending on your source, you might hear some people say that, for example, the Marcoses got their riches from hard work and not at all from large-scale corruption, so false. That the Marcoses actually fought the oligarchy, which is also false, and this is actually one of the heftier chapters in the book. And that they own, for example, tons of gold from either Yamashita or Italiano, which is also false, or that they own 1 quadrillion tons of gold, which is very, very false. Next slide. So false nostalgia addresses these myths from beginning to end. So every chapter begins with a series of claims seen in social media, and in fact, many of these are rather viral. And these are about certain aspects of the Marcos senior economy, from agriculture, infrastructure, poverty, hunger, corruption, cronyism, etc., which I quickly debunk at the outset before diving deep into the issue at hand. Next. So for example, I use Golden Age myths, even the silliest ones, as springboards to deep dive into certain topics of martial law economics. For instance, I use the erroneous claim that Marcos founded IRI, or the International Rice Research Institute, or that Marcos introduced tilapia to the Philippines to discuss the supposed golden age of agriculture. Next. So all of these discussions, and I think this is one of the value added when it comes to this book, is that these are thoroughly backed by a plethora of data sources and past studies that I have amassed over the years. I hope students and researchers will find the references an invaluable resource, and in the appendix, I also added a table that neatly summarizes some of the key statistics to come out of the Marcos senior economy as a sort of quick reference. Next slide. So, but even more than debunking the myths and facts, in my book, I try to envelope the statistics in stories and narratives. Study after study has shown that throwing data at people makes them hold on to their preconceived notions and beliefs even more. Stories, on the other hand, make data a lot more palatable or digestible. Next. So, for instance, I also used accessible language as much as possible, pruning the jargon but still peppering the book with graphs to the extent that I think they complement the stories and narratives that I tried to weave. For instance, it's one thing to show statistics about hunger during It's one thing to show statistics about hunger during martial law, but another to see the emaciated figure of children victimized by the Negros Island famine in the mid-1980s. Next. So actually, in more recent times, so amid this plethora of lies and disinformation, academics and experts are thankfully, if belatedly, pushing back. So a myriad anthologies authored by various scholars has been published by academic presses of late. So actually, days before today's launch of False Nostalgia, martial law books were being launched on an almost daily basis. And I'm part of some of them, so pagpasensya niyo na kung medyo nawawala yung boses ko. But I'm just one among many to join the fray of these academics pushing back against the tidal wave of disinformation. Next slide. So, while writing the book has been immensely gratifying, if not cathartic for me, I realized that it's just a springboard for more and even deeper conversations about a proper reckoning of the Marcos dictatorship's economic record. And certainly, I'm not delusional enough to think that the book, by itself or alongside many others recently published, can combat Marcosian disinformation on a sufficiently large scale. For this to happen, I think two broken things need to be fixed. Next slide. So first, the social media platforms and more generally the online information ecosystem by which this information spreads needs to be fixed. Unless major reforms are implemented in Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok's algorithms, we'll forever be trapped in silos and echo chambers, pulling us further apart and not together. In one extreme, this can cause countries to descend to illiberal democracy or downright authoritarianism, and the Philippines in this regard is proving to be a global petri dish. This and many related issues have been raised by many people, including Nobel Peace Prize laureate and Rappler CEO Maria Ressa in various opportunities. Next slide. A second, and I think more importantly, the way we teach history to kids also needs fixing. Philippine history was removed in high school in the wake of the K-12 basic education reform, but now more and more history teachers and historians are clamoring for its return as soon as possible. For most kids, they encounter Philippine history in elementary and don't encounter it again until they get to college. This is a very sad state of affairs that requires understanding and initiative on the part of education policymakers. But are they competent enough to make these necessary reforms ASAP? Is it even in their interest? Fact-checking and online literacy is another thing that can possibly stem the spread of disinformation and inoculate the newer generations from the viral spread of lies and myths. Success stories can be found in countries like Finland, and there's no reason to believe that starting them young, so to speak, won't work in this part of the world. There are also local success stories, including the way, for example, that my friend Mona Magnovelus, who's right here as well, aka Mighty Magulang on TikTok, has been creating content for youth who populate that social media platform. But integrating fact-checking and online literacy in the education system requires much initiative and political will. They say it takes a village to raise a child, but it also takes a village to raise a child who will grow up believing pernicious lies and beliefs that they will carry with them all the way to adulthood. Next slide. So in the end, I think fighting for the truth in the Philippines is going to be a long, hard slog, but what choice do we have? We can hardly curl up in a ball, however inviting that looks like. But you have to recall that the Marcoses have spent decades rehabilitating their image through years of planning, strategy, and patience. But if they can be diligent and patient, defenders of the truth can be even more so, in my opinion. Next slide. So at any rate, lies cannot live on forever. And there's that memorable quote from the HBO miniseries Chernobyl. If you haven't watched it, I highly recommend it. That's stuck with me ever since. It was said there that every lie we tell incurs a debt to the truth. Sooner or later, that debt is paid. But we cannot rest on this fact, and we have our work cut out for us. Sooner or later, we'll have to exact payment for that debt to the truth. Thank you all for attending the book launch of False Nostalgia, and looking forward to our discussion later on.
Ang dami na pong ballpen dito. Maraming salamat, JC. I mean, I can't tell you how grateful I am that a book like this has been written, and I hope more books about the martial law, debunking all the myths and all the inaccuracies that we've been bombarded with, that somehow the truth be finally set free. Ngayon po, nandun po tayo sa bahagi ng ating palatuntunan na tatawagin po natin ang mga pinagpipitagang mga panauhin na nainyayahan po upang magbigay ng kanilang komentaryo at pananaw tungkol po doon sa libro. Babasahin ko po ang kanila pong mga short bio. Medyo dediretsuhin ko na po, so huwag kayong maiinip. Tapos po ay tatawagin ko po sa Bongbong, ikaw ba yan? Alright, babasahin ko po isa-isa ang kanilang mga bio, and then iimbitahin ko po sila umakyat dito po sa entablado one by one. Okay, una po nating speaker ay si Dr. Emmanuel Soriano de Dios, or Noel, who is a professor emeritus at the UP School of Economics, where he served as professor of economics from 1989 to 2019. He is also the president of Human Development Network and has been the president since July 2012. He was also the dean of the UP School of Economics from 2007 to 2010. He received his AB Economics degree from the Ateneo de Manila University, cum laude, in 1978. Napatawad na po namin siya for graduating from Ateneo. Kasi naging dean naman po siya at naging professor. And his PhD in Economics from the University of the Philippines in 1987. He pursued postdoctoral studies at the Universitat Konstanz in Germany from 1987 to 1988, and is the author and editor of various books, monographs, articles, and reviews in economics. Our second speaker, who's going to share her views from the perspective of journalism, is Ms. Marites Dangilan Vitug, a leading Filipino investigative journalist and author, and editor-at-large for Rappler. She was editor of Newsbreak magazine, a trailblazer in Philippine investigative journalism. She has written 8 books. Her latest, Rock Solid, How the Philippines Won Its Maritime Case Against China, won the National Book Award and was translated into Vietnamese. Others include Shadow of Doubt, Probing the Supreme Court, which exposed critical weaknesses in the country's highest court, a first in the Philippines by a journalist. The next book is Power from the Forest, The Politics of Logging Under the Crescent Moon, Rebellion in Mindanao, written with Glenda M. Gloria and with Criselda Yabes, Halan Halan, Jalan Jalan, sabi ko nga, Jalan Jalan, a journey through East ASEAN growth area. Marites is also among the contributors of a 2021 book, Maritime Issues and Regional Order in the Indo-Pacific, published by Palgrave Macmillan, in a 1998 book, The Politics of Environment in Southeast Asia, published by Routledge. I'm sure I'm massacring, I'm murdering all the names, but it was published by Routledge. Correct. She was the host of a series of podcasts, The Great Asian Pushback, which featured personalities who shared their stories of defiance and hope in countries where democracy is under threat, produced by the Council of Asian Liberals and Democrats. Marites sits on the advisory board of Analyzing War, a US-based journal. She has a degree in AB Broadcast Communication from the University of the Philippines and a diploma in World Politics from the London School of Economics. She was a Nieman Fellow at Harvard University and a recipient of fellowships from the University of San Diego in California, the Pacific Leadership Fellow, the Rockefeller Foundation Writing Fellowship in Bellagio Center, Lago di Como, Italy, the International House in Tokyo, the Asia Leadership Fellow Program, the Australian National University, University of Kyoto, and the National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies in Tokyo. She has won the National Book Award and various awards for reporting on Philippine justice, security, and political affairs, including the Courage in Journalism Award from the US-based International Women's Media Foundation. And our third speaker, who will give us her thoughts from the perspective of history, is Ms. Mona Magno Veluz, who serves as the National President of the Autism Society Philippines, more popularly known as Mighty Magulang on TikTok, where she discusses history and genealogy. She worked towards advanced degrees in business administration, applied business economics, and strategic market communications. Apart from her extensive experience in the corporate world and in the Autism Society, Mona is a self-confessed history geek and certified tita. She's a passionate genealogist, Ninuno hunter, as she calls it, involved in growing family trees for clans here and abroad, and in nurturing family forests as a Philippine curator on Jenny.com. All right. So our first discussant is Professor Emmanuel Didas.
This is anticlimactic because I'm going to read my foreword to JC's book. The problem of contested legacies, especially of dictators or or authoritarians is not unique to the Philippines. Even affluent, mature democracies have had to confront political divisions over the evaluation of leaders of recent and even. Hello? Yes, now it works. So at one extreme, Hitler's horrific crimes against humanity and the devastation and human toll caused by his wars of choice left no choice but for the Germans as a people to confront their problematic past, a process known as Vergangenheitsbewältigung. So I'm just establishing my German credentials. The process has led to a clear and official prohibition of symbols and propaganda that advocate or glorify Nazism. For example, you cannot find a Hitlerstraße in Germany. You have Marcos Highway, you have, it's different. Imelda Avenue. The whole German education system, mainstream media, official cultural institutions, political party system, the police and justice system are constantly mobilized to bring pressure to prevent a Nazi recrudescence. Of course, in other cases, the results are less clear-cut. For example, the remains of the Spanish dictator Francisco Franco, who ruled Spain from 1935 to 1975, 40 years, were exhumed only in 2018 after his earlier burial in the Valle de los Caídos, the equivalent of libingan ng mga bayani, and transferred to a private family vault. So don't lose hope. It took more than 4 decades after Franco's death for the Spanish government to decide that it was incompatible for a modern democracy to memorialize a dictator. These moves did not come without vehement political debates over Franco's legacy, but it does tell us that historical and political amnesia is neither inevitable nor irreparable. You can cite other instances, less clear-cut, like Argentina's Perón, China's Mao, the USSR's Stalin. In these cases, the struggle to overcome the past has barely begun. So it's by no means unusual if different groups in society hold conflicting assessments of past political personalities and events over long periods before coming to a final judgment that is acceptable to most citizens, or at least learning to live with their remaining difference enough to move on with their national future. Some societies succeed at it better than others, making a break with the past sooner rather than later, more completely rather than partially and tepidly. But in all these processes, one thing is clear. While people are free to choose their judgment and even hold on to these over long periods of time, they cannot choose to ignore facts. An indispensable condition for overcoming problematic periods in a nation's life is an agreement on fundamental facts and events. In the natural course of things, national reflection, political debate, the media, the education system, but above all, scholarship, should be expected over time to distill fact from fiction and pave the way for an appreciation of the past that can serve as a sound rational basis for moving on. From this perspective, the Filipinos' effort to grapple with the legacy of the authoritarian rule of Marcos has truly been remarkable, because rather than leading to final clarity and reconciliation, the passage of time has instead only produced increased distortion and dissension. Rather than putting paid to the issues raised by the dictatorship and relegating this to history books, these have only cropped up in new forms and repetitive debates that time and again threaten to crowd out more urgent debates over more urgent national concerns. An important underlying difference for the Philippines is precisely that historical fact has itself been distorted, disputed, and manufactured. Werner Sombart, ayan, German na naman yan, wrote famously that facts are like beads, requiring a string to connect them, emphasizing the need for a theoretical narrative of history. In our case, however, Zombart's well-known aphorism must be reversed. It's not that we merely need the string of a national narrative to tie down the beads of facts together. We lack even the genuine beads to work into a narrative. The beads with which our people are supplied are pieces of stale pastry that crumble upon closer handling and scrutiny. And without facts, no reliable narrative can be woven. I call attention to a recent article by some people whom you might know, Dean Dulay, Alan Hicken, Anil Menon, and Ronnie Holmes, who is my colleague in Pulse Asia. Dean Dulay is a graduate of the school's graduate school. They report and analyze Pulse Asia data regarding people's historical memory. Pulse asks respondents about their feelings over historical events, notably Spanish colonialism, martial law, and the People's Power Revolution, which we mark today. The results are not encouraging. More people have positive feelings about martial law than those who have negative feelings. 37% versus 27%. 40% believe martial law had positive effects. So one is feelings, this one is effects. 40% believe martial law had positive effects compared to the 20% that hold a contrary opinion. On the other hand, more people also had positive views concerning EDSA, the negative, 32% versus 25%, as well as the impact of the People's Power Revolution, 32% versus 18%. The main result must be, if you want to observe it, the significant numbers who have no opinion, positive or negative, regarding these events. In fact, almost, if you think it's just a political thing, in fact, almost half the population had ambivalent feelings towards Spanish colonialism. 48% of the respondents could not say whether they had positive or negative feelings about Spanish colonialism. In the case of the collective memory of martial law, this situation has arisen owing to several weaknesses: political, intellectual, and institutional. The political failure is that numerous vested interests, careers, and political reputations of people continue to depend on a misrepresentation of the Marcos era, most notably the Marcos Romualdez family itself and its many hangers-on. This can ultimately be traced to the political fragility and lack of will of post-EDSA governments, which failed to seize the opportunity to make a clean sweep off and hold to account the enemies of democracy with their illiberal agendas. The second reason is one for which we as scholars must bear responsibility: our complacency. That is, the failure to provide a coherent and definitive fact-based account of the country's social history and development that could provide a rallying point for society. Such an account would have properly put the period of the Marcos dictatorship in its place as a definite backward step in the country's development. Of course, none of this is helped by the chronic weaknesses and corruption of the country's important institutions, the justice system, which has failed time and again to prosecute the crimes under the Marcos regime. We read recently about cases that are dismissed. And if you read closely, it's not really an acquittal, it's a technicality that this person was not, did not appear in person and therefore could not attest to his earlier statement, or that only photocopies were available of incriminating documents, or that the time taken for the ombudsman had been so long that the case had become stale. So that is the failure of the justice system. And then, of course, there's the education and media institutions whose low quality and obsequiousness prevented them from taking any initiative in affirming even the most basic facts, not to mention providing the context of important events in the nation's history. And not the least, there's the low ethical level of the country's commercial and industrial elites, for whom wealth, from whatever source, appears the only criterion for social acceptance and respectability. These preconditions have rendered the mass of Philippine society, already poorly informed, poorly educated, and politically disengaged, rendered them vulnerable to what was a new phenomenon of the weaponization of social media. Trolls, influencers, micro-celebrities, and other spreaders of fake news, cynically organized and paid for by operators in a network of disinformation, have rushed to fill in the vacuum. The vacuum left by deficient politics, scholarship, education, and elite culture. It has since become known that the now pervasive Marcos Golden Age myth, the subject of this book, was the result of a well-organized campaign of positive branding, cascaded down from political strategists to digital influencers. While that campaign achieved its immediate object of returning the Marcos family and its cohorts to the country's highest positions, it also wreaked long-term havoc on the minds of many Filipinos whose understanding of Philippine history and their own condition has, as a result, become even more confused, as seen in the opinion polls that I just quoted. Beyond political campaigns, it is this deeper damage that must be repaired. This book of JC is a bold step in that direction. It is the signal service of JC to take the step of directly confronting misinformation in its existing shape and form, and using the cold eye of scholarship to correct it point by point. In so doing, JC breaks out of the mold of those academics who look with disdain on correcting popular misconceptions as something beneath them, or as something too obvious or banal to engage their attention. Such an attitude is what has left the field free for the purveyors of disinformation in the first place. JC is both a bona fide, first-rate academic and an engaged warrior in the trenches of social media. His double credentials are reflected in this book. It is a unique juxtaposition of populist misconceptions as propagated in social media on the one hand, and serious academic research debunking these on the other, with full respect and seriousness paid to both. As JC himself points out, some of these myths might appear shallow or absurd, but these are useful springboards that we can use for a deep dive into various aspects of the Marcosian economy. True to his concern for undoing the damage caused by the network of disinformation, he directly enumerates the false memes that have proliferated regarding the Marcosian so-called Golden Age, which are already too well known to him and which he has frequently combated in a tit-for-tat manner in his social media accounts. But his approach to debunking them in this volume takes the long form of thoroughly grounded scholarly research, thus mastering history, economics, politics, and political economy in the explanation, and in some cases even presenting new factual material. This has the advantage not only of a summary fact check, but also the presentation of a larger narrative. Extending Zombard's simile, JC crushes the fake beads, supplies more durable ones as well as provides a strong string. This work is, by its example, an implicit two-way challenge. Scholars are asked to show serious concern for the state of mind of their broader society and to devote efforts to dispel myths and reverse disinformation. To the general public, the invitation is to look beyond memes, facile judgments, and smart comebacks, and begin the hard task of confronting the unvarnished truth of the country's history. May our responses be worthy of the efforts and engagement of JC and the successor generation he represents. Thank you.
Naman po ay si Marites ang magsasalita.
Mahirap sundan si Professor Noel de Dios, but at least he gave us the big picture. So good afternoon to everyone. It's really great to be here, to be part of the launch of False Nostalgia. I have a sneaking suspicion that today has been declared a holiday at the last minute to scuttle events like this, or any commemoration of EDSA 1. Anything to take our minds off the history of the Marcoses. So I'm really glad we're gathered here, defying holiday economics. It's also a thrill to be in the UP School of Economics, this venerable institution, the source of policy makers for the country, particularly NEDA, where alumni of this school have had a lock on its leadership, as well as the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. Today, we celebrate J.C. Punong Bayan's Mythbuster, his dragon-slaying book, False Nostalgia. What is wonderful about this is that a millennial, one who was born after the martial law years, during our to democracy, confronts false narratives about this period in our history. This is an answer to benighted comments about young people not having the authority to speak or write about the Marcos years because they weren't there. Hindi ka pa ipinapanganak noon. You see those stupid comments on social media. They chose to ignore the power of research, and as Noel said, scholarly research, and of young minds doggedly seeking the truth. So this book really makes us hopeful about the young and the successor generation. It is a contribution to our ongoing task of nation building, which requires that we share a common set of facts. Progress will be elusive if we're wrapped in our own silos, believing lies and fabricated stories about our past. We've seen this unfold in our last elections, resulting in a manufactured nostalgia, allowing our memories to be bent and refracted, and ultimately distorting our history. So this book reminds us that Marcos Jr.'s path to Malacanang was littered with bits and pieces of disinformation. Truth became a chimera, false narratives about the Marcoses and the dictatorship became real. As the former editor of The Guardian, Alan Rusbridger, wrote, and I quote, "A society that cannot agree on a factual basis for discussion or decision-making cannot progress. There can be no democracy without a shared understanding of what's true and what is not. A commonly agreed basis of facts is only the beginning." End of quote. So this book will help us reach common ground. Now let me say a few words about fact-checking, which has become a vital part of our public life. Fact-checking has become a full-time job in the last few years. Today, newsrooms, though not all, have staff who do nothing but scour the online world for fake news and deliberately misleading stories, particularly those that are widely shared. Fact-checkers call attention to these falsities and correct them as well as provide context. This can be a frustrating job because it's like putting out fire every single day. false news spreads quickly. One author described it as a digital wildfire, and at a fast pace that is difficult to keep up with. Fact checkers have barely exhaled, then another false news comes up, like in a conveyor belt. So what this book does is it focuses its fact-checking on a specific period in our history and presents this in a comprehensive manner, training its sights on the golden age that was supposedly the Marcos era. Now we have a convenient reference, especially when Marcos Jr., using the president's pulpit, repeats any of this golden age blah blah. False nostalgia would come to the rescue, and it's literally handy, maliit lang, we can put it in our bags, our weapon against these lies. One final point I would like to make is that academe meets social media in this book. It bridges scholarship and popular media, and it proves that academics are not holed out in an ivory tower detached from the public. It makes the case that university professors are not necessarily stiffs, writing in heavy, turgid prose. There was a time when professors tended to look down on popular media, and I think that era is fading, and we see the likes of J.C. Punong Bayan engaging the public through social media and news platforms. I welcome this demolition of the stereotype of a bespectacled professor who reads only academic journals and weighty tomes that can also serve as door stoppers. Moreover, economics is not an easy subject to relate to. I remember taking a basic economics subject during my undergraduate years here in UP, and I found it somewhat abstract. So this book is far from theoretical. False nostalgia popularizes economic concepts and issues, and non-economists like me will not get lost in a thicket of abstractions. So JC, here's an idea for your next book. How about debunking the myths and lies about a recent past president? There is another Duterte waiting in the wings to take her father's place. And that is an unsettling prospect for our democracy. Thank you for listening.
Maraming salamat. So bumili po kayo ng libro ni JC para po matuloy yung susunod na volume. Okay, let me call on Mona on stage. Thank you.
Magandang hapon po sa lahat po ng nagfa-follow sa akin sa TikTok. Meow meow. So, my name is Mona Magno-Veluz, and as earlier introduced, I am the National President of the Autism Society Philippines, pero I am one of those slash people na marami ho akong racket. So, of late, I am a content creator on social media, and I talk about history and genealogy because I am also a genealogist. O, di ba? Slash. Madami akong slash. And I am actually so honored to be here today talking after, such big shots in the economics and the publishing world. But I'm also happy that Professor Mary Racelis is here because in the genealogy world, fangirl ako. Superstar na superstar po si Dr. Mary Racelis because she descends from Patrick Henry and Charlemagne. O, di ba, Char? Oh, talaga, totoo yun hindi charot yun. Okay. So, I also wanted to reminisce a little bit. No? I'm a graduate of UP. I was actually a student here in the School of Economics in 1987, a year after the revolution. Dati parang mas madilim itong kwartong to. Winnie Monsod was our teacher in Econ 11. And I remember those years as, all of these things that we talk about today, the status of the economy during the difficult years, we discussed that in the context of news. So news ho sa amin yun. So parang there was a general acceptance that these were all facts. So when I took my master's in the 1990s in applied business economics, whenever somebody brought up, let's talk about martial law, no, that's so passé, di ba? Let's talk about liberalization. Let's talk about the telecoms industry because that was sexy. So I think for those from my generation, there was this brushing off of the whole concept of that revolution because we need to move on. We need to look at the next thing after this horrible time in our history and in our economy. Fast forward a couple of years later, in 2021, when I started on TikTok, my first viral video was on the economic impact of martial law. And that was viral, as in people did not know what I'd grown up to know as facts. In fact, they had another story. I realized at that point na, ay, natulog kami sa kangkungan. Habang, we were living our lives and, improving our careers, there were movers in the background who were trying to change the facts. And that brought us to this point. And as a content creator, nagbabasa po ako ng comments. Siguro hindi lahat. Ako nagbabasa ako ng comments. And I could see when JC flashed a lot of his FAQs on the screen kanina, lahat po yun binabato sa akin. Na parang, ay, ganun, parang may script. Buti na lang, yung script nila na nakuha na rin ni JC. So anyway, I guess what I would like to stress is, I'm sorry. In behalf of my generation, I apologize dahil natulog kami. We were not awake enough to catch all of these things from happening. And I think what we are having to deal with today is an opportunity to make things better. And I would like to also thank JC for doing this book because it is, among many things, well-researched, it is bite-sized, and it comes organized in a way that is simpler to understand. Because the reality is, a lot of people are not fans of reading. Sorry po, Ateneo Press. Hindi, pero it has to be easy to read. And this book, in my view, I think is something that would be an important tool for anyone who would like to go out and talk about topics as informed individuals. Hindi lang po puso ang ginagamit, hindi lang po ang opinion ang ginagamit. Kailangan meron tayong basis for what we talk about out there. And JC has kindly summarized all of that for us. And I guess the other thing that I would like to talk about is when we do talk to others, whether online or face-to-face, hindi po pwedeng facts lang ang dala natin. Kailangan po may dala rin tayong pag-intindi at compassion to a certain degree. Meron talaga mga taong evil, pero karamihan sa kanila, I feel, are also victims of misinformation and disinformation. And you would, lalo na kung kamag-anak nyo, kung kapamilya ninyo, you would have to approach them with a certain sense of compassion. Para together, hawak kamay kayo, you are going towards the truth. I think that is the best way to use the information that you will get from this book. At JC also made the point about changing the way we communicate. Sa lahat po ng mga teachers, sa lahat po ng mga, I guess, millennials na nandyan, sa totoo lang, we need to teach the way students learn. And that, ang tatay ko po was also a professor. He always says that if the students are asleep, you wake up the teacher. We have to explore different ways of tackling very harsh and difficult subjects. I cannot, although I've already done this. Now, when somebody asks a question, I send them somebody's thesis, dahil andun lahat ng facts, hindi nila babasahin yun. So, kailangan po talaga we change our approach to providing the information to those we love and kahit na those na nakakadao pang palad natin sa social media. So, sana po, kunin natin ang libro ni JC. Gusto ko itong makitang nakahalukip-kip sa mga content creators on TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, at kung saan-saan man, habang nagtiting-ting-ting-ting-ting sila, di ba? Kasi yun ang kailangan natin. Kung yun ang paraan para matandaan nila ang importanteng mga lessons ng ating kasaysayan, abay go. Support natin yon. Maraming salamat. Maraming salamat, JC. O, di ba?
Thank you, Mona. Maraming salamat, Mona, kay Noel, at saka kay Marites. No? Para sa very insightful. I'll be takot na takot ako sa social media. Narinig ko lang yung ting kasi may nagkwento sa akin, but I suppose it's one of those things. So hindi ako masyadong ma-social media, but I suppose this is the new way of the world. No? Kasi ibang generation ako eh. At this point, may I request JC to be on stage and we'll entertain superstar. Rock star. Ganyan. Lang sa... this is the time to ask our author. No? Poging-pogi talaga eh. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. I was about to say, there's supposed to be a microphone there. So hinabon, there's a microphone in the middle. Please approach the microphone, introduce yourself and your affiliation, and then go ahead and ask the question. Yes, please.
Oh, that was a trip. Excuse me. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
1, 2, 1, 2, test.
Yeah. Si Bongbong yan, I swear.
Did you learn anything new, or did something surprise you with regards to, compiling all these facts about people and made all this information? And the number, and the other one, I'm curious if there were some parts that maybe you left out. Maybe there's a record something.
Thank you for those questions. Definitely, even after nearly 7 years of research into this, I'm still learning lots from time to time. And one of the more recent things that I actually rushed in the final proofs of the book, relates to the central bank, of the history of the Central Bank of the Philippines. And I got into this because of all the discussion when it comes to the Maharlika Investment Fund, because initially, if you will know, they were planning to get some money from the international reserves of the BSP. Okay, but actually, this has kind of a history because up until recently, because actually I mentioned this in the book na bankrupt yung Central Bank of the Philippines by the tail end of the dictatorship, kung saan the losses of the central bank amounted to about 300 billion pesos. The central bank didn't have any independence at all from the Marcos Sr. regime, and Marcos Sr. himself directed the Bangko Sentral to lend to many of the crony businesses and the industries that they were involved in. Pero the fallback from that is that many of the cronies didn't pay at all or repay the loans that they had from the central bank, and that's one reason why by the end of the dictatorship, it amassed so much losses. It was so bad that they had to rebrand it into an entirely new institution that we now call the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. However, the losses arising from the central bank really had to be, essentially, they were converted into debt. So for a long time, we were still paying for those losses amassed by the old central bank. However, that got me thinking na parang this is something that wasn't originally in the book, pero because of all the discussions with Maharlika, I think I thought it would be actually essential to discuss that part. So ayun, ano nga ba yung pangalawang tanong? Ha? Director's Cut. May volume 2 na nga, sabi ni Ma'am Marites. Simulan ko na bukas. Pero ayun, so actually there's still a lot to write. Actually, when it comes to this, in the UP School of Economics, we teach martial law economics for an entire semester, and Professor Emeritus Noel de Jos is the pioneer when it comes to that subject, and I was lucky enough to be one of his teaching assistants, teaching fellows back in 2017 along with Miharu Kimwell. In this very auditorium, so Sir Noel would lecture about Philippine economic history, and then many students found that one of the most transformational and illuminating subjects that they took here at the UP School of Economics. Kasi it's one thing to be discussing macroeconomic concepts like GDP, debt, etc. Pero it's another thing to be able to relate those to actual events in the past, especially here in the Philippines. So, ayun, there's so much material. It takes an entire semester, pero I hope I captured the essential parts here in the book. So I hope you find that illuminating, this book illuminating and insightful. Thank you.
Hello, Ryan Macaser, reporter ng Rappler. First, congrats, JC. My question is, do you think it's too late to correct these myths na it's been years since the Marcos administration, and alam naman natin lahat yung kalaban mo hindi lang disinformation kundi mga algorithms. These myths are also permeating into radio, into TV. So, do you think it's too late, or are you hopeful that we can still, fight these myths?
Well, in a way, it's late, pero you have to note that the disinformation surrounding the economy during martial law, this is really nothing new. Even when the Marcoses came back from Hawaii to the Philippines in the early 1990s, they were already spewing lots of these myths and lies and disinformation. It just so happened that we didn't have Facebook, we didn't have YouTube and all these new platforms. So I guess the spread of these lies wasn't really that effective and tend to be quite localized. Pero unfortunately for us, with the proliferation of these platforms nga, and the way the algorithms are designed, na talagang it will only show you, for example, in your timeline, things that based on your previous viewing or previous scrolling would interest you. So we're essentially trapped, and the algorithm is learning from us on what type of content we see on a daily basis. So I think we have to confront, or we have to strategize, and we have to adapt to this new information ecosystem because hindi naman natin, nandiyan na yan eh, yung mga tao, yung mga Pilipino, nasa Facebook na talaga yan. There will not come a time when there will be, for example, just 10% of Filipinos on Facebook. Of course, for example, Maria Reza has raised the issue that reforms need to be implemented on the part of the social media platforms themselves. However, unfortunately, for example, in the US, even yung mga lawmakers there, parang they don't even or understand how these platforms work. So, for example, when they grill Mark Zuckerberg or other tech giants, hindi nila alam kung anong itatanong or paano i-confront or paano babaguhin yung mga algorithms. So, ayun parang while that's happening outside of the Philippines, I think, yun nga, tulad ng sinabi ko, we can do things here. We can learn and we can adapt and we can teach the kids, for example, how to be more discerning or more critical. However, we need to see that happening sooner rather than later. Thank you. We can learn and we can adapt and we can teach the kids, for example, how to be more discerning or more
Hi, Kuya. I have two questions for you. I'm Jolene. I'm Sir JC's cousin.
Maraming family today.
Yeah, I have two questions. So I was wondering if you faced any resistance writing this book online or in person, and if that affected your decision to keep writing it or to publish it. And I was wondering what your favorite chapter was. So I was wondering
Julene, actually for the longest time, I've been on social media. I've been active. Before I was really active, it was only in around 2015 that I became active. And since then, I've just happened to block already many of the trolls that have been attacking me. So I don't really see or hear about the things that they say about me. So I guess that's one way to defend yourself when you're online. You can report, for example, offensive tweets, or you can outright block them in the process. So I guess that's one layer of protection, so you don't get distracted with the work at hand. Pero ayun I know many friends na talagang they completely disengage from social media because it can get quite toxic talaga, and that's totally understandable. Pero I would think na siguro, especially for academics and experts who know about this part of our history, historians, for example, have been speaking out more, and even economists. So I guess parang you really need to have that tough outer shell to resist, or parang you need to be able to defend yourself when you're defending the truth. So I guess there are ways of doing that, pero sometimes it gets to you, pero most of the time you just have to ignore the noise that's surrounding you. Oh, favorite chapter? Marami. The entire book. Pero I guess siguro yung mga simula. For example, yung myth or yung chapter about the Philippines being the richest country in Asia. Kasi, for example, the data that I show there, that's quite convincing and quite compelling. The way, for example, we read it from the data, and then if it's graph, it makes easily the point na talagang with just one look, parang makikita mo na hindi talaga siya golden age ng country natin. So I guess, yeah, the first one, I guess. And then if it's graph, it makes easily the point na
Hello. Yeah. Hey, JC, congratulations. So,
Thank you.
first, my name's Eric, and I'm a content creator as well, pero nothing like Ma'am Mona, nothing like JC in his pieces. So, I just wanted to recognize si JC and si Ma'am Mona. They're at the very forefront of understanding that information ecosystem that JC was talking about. So, thank you for all your efforts. So, yung tanong ko, given everything that you know so far, how do you think people can turn the tide? People like you, people like Ma'am Mona, people like everyone in the audience. Kasi essentially, we're the minority now. Like 30%, 40% based on the most recent elections, right? And you have to understand, if you slay one dragon, 100 more heads will pop up, right? And us, even if we're motivated by good faith, even if we're motivated by the truth, they're motivated by financial incentives. They're motivated by less, sabihin na natin other things than what we're motivated by, right? So how do we get to that tipping point? Kasi I really love the fact that you handle the discussions in a mahinahong manner, right? You're presenting the facts, and hindi ka rin nanggagago nung kausap mo, right? Because that's the number one thing that's gonna tick them off. If you treat them, if you point your finger at them, okay, hindi na sila makikinig. Sarado na kagad yung tenga nila. How do we get to that tipping point? I loved yung sinabi ni Ma'am Mona na natulog tayo sa kangkungan, and I think that's a very good realization. From the 90s, post-EDSA, wala talagang ginawa to be able to solidify that and chop off that dictatorship, let's say, behavior or regime or loyalists, if you will. How do we get there? Parang napakahirap kasi. Thank you.
Oo nga, ang hirap nga ng tanong. Hindi ko alam yung sagot. Pero I guess yung earlier point mo about incentives, I think we can take steps. For example, when it comes to academics trying to engage in public discussions, the incentive structure of academia, of universities, I guess, needs to change as well. For example, when it comes to promotions and other perks of being an academic, ang binibilang yung pagsusulat mo, for example, in journal articles, rather than, for example, talks, for example, or books like this, mas talagang may binibigyan ng primacy yung journal articles, which is also quite necessary and important, pero siguro just to level off na parang siguro let's also give some incentive for academics when they engage in public discussions. Yung sa social media platforms as well, I think some of these platforms give some financial incentives for people who create content na talagang seeking truth or defending truth. I guess that's one more important step in that direction. Na parang incentivize people to create content toward revealing truths rather mistruths, etc. So ayun eh, I mean, we're talking about economics, and the economics, especially microeconomics, is all about incentives, ano? And I guess, of course, saan ba magagaling incentives na yun? Can we expect it from government? Or if not, from CSOs, from academia, and other groups? I guess that there needs to be that kind of rethinking dun sa the way we produce truths or content toward revealing the truth in this day and age. Thank you.
Kiko de los Reyes from UP School of Statistics. Congratulations, JC.
Thank you, Sir Kix.
I'm really proud of you. Tsaka nakakatuwa yung paggamit mo ng datos doon sa pagsulat mo ng libro mo. So ang tanong ko is, ano yung statistic na na-encounter mo in your research that was really spun so wildly na parang nagamit na siya sa lahat halos ng mga pagsisinungaling? Parang naging material siya sa mga lies. Statistics siya na na-observe natin, na-generate natin, pero na-spun talaga siya so wildly. Thank you.
Oh, well, I guess one example that comes to mind would be yung statistics when it comes to the debt, the national debt. There are these certain influencers on Facebook, for example, Sir Kix, na nagsisinasabi nila the debt that was added during the entire Marcos dictatorship was just about $1 billion, as I mentioned earlier, when in fact the true value would be about $25 billion. And then sinasabi nila marami silang justifications like, for example, yung minana, for example, na debt from the previous administrations, etc. Pero when you try to trace yung mga statements nila on Facebook, parang you will be led to certain parang mga fringe mga publications in the US na when I check the other articles na kasabay nun, parang may mga articles on UFOs, ganyan. Na parang sabi ko, ito pala yung source niya. Doon sa debt statistics, may UFOs. So parang gano'n na parang sobrang absurd eh. No? Na parang at the outset, ang laki na ng diferensya, 1 versus 25 billion. And then ganun pa yung mga narratives. And when you check, parang, and some people have done this, na parang copy-paste lang talaga across comment sections, posts on Facebook and Twitter, na parang talagang it kind of tells you that this is a machinery when it comes to producing lies and mistruths. Na parang isa lang, it's very centralized. Ito yung mga network disinformation that some scholars and Rappler has investigated on before. Na talagang this is a really concerted effort to manufacture certain statements and certain facts na alternative truths, etc. So, ganun. I guess that also relates to how we distribute yung factual material na parang ano ba yung parang we should also take from something from their playbook eh. Why are they so effective? And then let's apply that doon sa pag-produce naman ng factual content.
Check mic test. Check.
Ayan, hello. Good afternoon, everyone. So I hope everyone's having a good afternoon so far. Hi, sir. I am Ricky from the UP School of Economics Student Council and also UP ETC. So si sir po yung faculty advisor po namin. So sobrang, our org couldn't be any prouder and more inspired. It's really big shoes to fill in and take after. So I think we should give sir a huge round of applause. And I think my question would be centered around like our role as students and especially as the youth and mga ekonomista para sa bayan. Especially since a while ago it has been mentioned multiple times, it has been reiterated na kailangan natin, i-laymanize yung economic jargon and as well as, make these information and research more accessible, especially to the masses. So I think my question would be, how can we as students or as the youth contribute to this movement, especially when people are less receptive to new information and opposing information to that they believe in? Yun lang po, sir.
Thank you. I actually have to mention at this point that the UP School of Economics Student Council has actually done a great job in trying to debunk many of these economic lies. Just a few years back, yung Student Council is actually, based on previous papers and references, meron silang mga social media cards that went viral on Facebook na talagang this is how the youth consumes content, very visual, at dapat nag-cater ka talaga doon sa pagiging visual na yun. So as many videos as possible, as many photos. Pero the problem is, of course, it's quite difficult and it exacts a lot of energy and time from you to create that kind of content. Pero the Student Council has done a great job, and that's one way by which the youth can try to push back against this information. Just this morning, I was in Poveda, and merong silang whole day activity about surrounding martial law, the EDSA commemoration, etc. So natuwang-tuwa ako dun sa mga engagement with the youth, na parang these are high school students na talagang engaged sila, na parang ang haba ng Q&A namin, ang gaganda ng mga tanong. So that gives me a bit of hope na talagang there's this even newer generation na talagang they're really pushing back and doing their best. So there's still hope, guys. Huwag tayong mawala ng pag-asa, especially in the youth.
Alright, salamat. Yes po, ma'am.
Yeah, Mary Rosales, thank you very much for this. I'm a fan of his. I keep following him to different groupings. Anyway, the question I have for you, and maybe also for Karina of the Ateneo Press, is when are you going to translate this into the major languages of the Philippines? It is, we all want to reach, quote, the masses or the majority population who believe what you're attacking, right? So I work a lot in the civil society sector. You're all talking about the academic world, students, and so on, and that's very important. But there's this whole social, civil society groups all over the Philippines, POs, NGOs, religious groups who have social development workers, all over the place, right? And I know that they are looking for this kind of material, but they will not be, some of them, of course, will read this, but most have to talk to people at grassroots level. And so they're the influencers on the ground who need to have a way of maybe pamphlets. Maybe you should have pamphlet chapters in Filipino and the major languages. You might have to simplify it. Somebody has to simplify so that it's something easy to discuss in the local language. And there has to be a system that will pay for massive distribution of this and the training that goes with it. And this is where the academics like yourself can help, and the students who have discussed here, that you can sit. Actually, this is what my generation did during the martial law time, where you went to grassroots groups and tried to explain what was going on, right? It's the same thing, but of course, a very different setting today. So I'm saying we need to look at the influencers, certainly on social media, but the influencers who are close to the ground, who also are using, of course, social media, and are now trying to figure out how do I adapt that to what I have to do. But they are really talking to real people, because that's their job, and we need to support them with formats that are really usable on the ground. Thank you. What's your view on translation? And maybe Karina wants to reply.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Mary Roselis. So I'm quite privileged that she chose to attend this book launch out of the many other events happening this afternoon. So thank you, Dr. Roselis. It's such an honor. But yeah, there was actually that kind of discussion early on, and I think Ma'am Corina will be talking about that later, about whether to write in Filipino or in English. And then eventually we settled with English. Pero that there was that kind of recognition that, of course, when it comes to this kind of information, that's quite crucial, or parang establishing basic facts. There's the case to be made that this should be in Filipino or in the vernacular. So I guess, in fact, that's something that I did in Rappler for the past year or so. In the months leading up to the 2022 elections, I wrote from English and then shifted into Filipino. And when you speak in Filipino, you think differently as well. Na parang it becomes easier to explain things. You can insert jokes or other materials that make the material a lot more relatable. So I guess, and then I shifted back to English ulit recently. Pero yeah, I mean, that's certainly a necessary effort as well. Ano? And I think academics as well, parang academics cannot do this alone. So there needs to be a much deeper relationship between academics on the one hand and civil society organizations, community organizers to really proliferate this type of basic information. And I really hope that this book is really just the start of that kind of conversation, and much more materials can come out of it. For example, those pamphlets and other things. And I hope that can be done, especially by the youth in the coming months and years.
Just one more question, and then there's an online question. See, Professor Aburo daw has a burning question. Yes.
And other things, and I hope that can be done, especially by the youth in the coming months and years.
Okay, thank you very much, JC. I'm very much pleased that somebody who was not here during martial law is actually spearheading a movement that I think is very important. My question, I think, is not so much about the social media, but the actual media. And very recently, about a week or so ago, 2 people died almost at the same time, and one of them was hailed as a hero. Roberto Ongpin was hailed by the Congress as having saved the Philippines because of the Binondo Central Bank. I looked at your book, and there is a reference to it, but that's not the entire story. I think that it still has to be written. During that time, we wrote in the School of Economics, some of us faculty members wrote about it because it was completely wrong. It was completely a prostitution of the institution of that we have. And therefore, when that news came out, it shocked me. You know, the idea that Roberto Ongpin was the one who actually saved the Philippines. That's crazy. That's crazy. You know, a person who is rounding up all these smugglers and saying, "You smugglers, give us some of the money. You can keep the rest," right? And therefore, every day you send a plane to Hong Kong, deposit the money, all the cash dollars into PNB so that it will become officially flow into the Philippines. That's crazy. I couldn't understand it, but there was nothing to hear about it. What did people say about it? I didn't hear anything. So that's a question. The second thing is that I would like to ask is that there is a lot of what I would call fugitive material, which still has to be uncovered. I have seen in my own eyes official documents with Marcos's marginal notes. And those marginal notes actually prostitutes also the institutions. For example, I saw one and the reason I have access because I was in the government after the revolution. I had access to the document which said, Marcos said, give this guy tax-free. In other words, you know, that's the order. And that's pervasive, not only in some areas of the government, but everyone else. And the reason why I'm saying that is because probably the private sector benefited from that as well. And that's not known at all. So there are a lot of things that I think that still remains to be written. And I think that I would like to suggest that you continue to champion this whole idea of debunking the myths of the
Book 3.
Pretty soon we will have a George Santos in our midst. And we want to avoid that to take place. So thank you very much, JC. I don't think you need to answer any of those.
Thank you, Sir Florian. Parang volume 3 na yun, Volume 2 from Marites, volume 3 from Sir Florian. Pero yeah, I think that the death of Roberto Ongpin, actually I mentioned him a number of times in the book, but not in the context, for example, in his involvement in the Binondo Central Bank and other things. Siguro dun sa reprint, isisingit ko yung mention na yun. Pero yeah, I think I saw some of those articles in the news when he died na parang they sang the praises of Roberto Ongpin. Pero yun nga, parang when you read through those articles, parang it lacks a lot of context of the full extent of his involvement doon sa Marcos dictatorship. So yeah, I guess actually when I saw the news, sabi ko, habol ko sana, kaya lang piniprint na yung libro eh. So ganun, there's so many things happening right now. For example, yung mga cases that have been dismissed by the Supreme Court regarding graft, as well as yung deaths of certain personalities who were quite prominent during the dictatorship. So there's that constant need to actually parang, there are those prompts na parang every so often, parang there's a news item that brings us back to that episode in our economic history. And then when it comes to those fugitive documents that you mentioned, Sir Florian, patingin naman kung meron ka pang copy na harapin natin yung mga documents na yan together. Yun lang, thank you.
Promise to 2 questions na lang talaga. Yes, please.
Kinagagalak ko kayang makilala. Dito sa mga audience, si Mary Racelis ay isang tao na may buhay na noong panahon ng Hapon. Ewan ko lang kung yung mga kabata dito, naraman na, natuto na ang ano nangyari sa noong panahon ng Hapon. Nakaranasan ng Pilipino ay unang batas militar dito sa Pilipinas. Sa pangalawang batas militar, yung panahon ni Ferdinand Marcos, narito ako sa Pilipinas bilang isang estudyante ng sosyolohiya dito sa Diliman. 18 months before the declaration of martial law, katulad ng mga karamihan ng estudyanteng taga-Pilipinas o estudyante nasa UP, aktivista ako. Pagdating ng martial law, nahihirapan ako dahil ako ay isang dayuhan. Ilang buwan na nakaranas at naging Japanese language instructor ako sa isang language school ng Embahada ng Japan. Sometime in late 1974, I was an interpreter for top Japanese business financial leaders visiting Malacanang for courtesy call to the then president. Between the executive desk and the Japanese mission, I acted as an interpreter. I participated in the formation of the so-called Japanese-Filipino joint ventures, from nothing to the establishment of the factory and operation, because I was an interpreter. Ako po si Mamoru Tsuda, also known as Rico J, hindi Rico J Puno. Rico na Japanese. Siyempre, bilang isang Hapones, ang concern nako ay ano ang kaugnayan, ano ang mga interest ng pamahalaang Pilipinas ni Marcos at pamahalaan namin ng Japan. Diplomatic and otherwise. Ano ang kaugnayan ng mga negosyante, industrialists? Ano ang kaugnayan, interest ng so-called investors? I wonder if you have encountered in certain phenomena of not only Philippine-Japan relations, but also various international, multinational, transnational relations in terms of Philippine economy. How about international trade? How about direct investments? How about joint ventures and direct investments? And foreign international remittance coming from migrant Filipinos. I haven't read your book, but I would like to know if you have included those aspects of Philippine economy in your book. Would you be enlighten us? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sir Rico J. Unfortunately, the relations of the Philippine government with the Japanese government during that time was not part of. It's not part of this book. But definitely, for example, there have been waves of investments coming from Japan around that time. And I think I made mention of some of these transactions. For example, specific examples that you can find in the book, I think one or two. Pero a full-blown explanation is not part of the book. Maybe sa volume 2 or 3 or 4 na ba to? Sige. Pero yes, thank you so much for that suggestion. And I mean, that just points to you that there's so many things to write about. Pero at least for starters, maybe this should be a good first step.
Hanggang retirement na yan, JC. Alright, totoo na to, last question.
Hello. Hello. Okay. Magandang buhay, jolly afternoon. Una sa lahat, maraming salamat po sa tiwala sa pag-design ng cover ng book. Sobrang grateful ko po na napag-collaborate. Ay, thank you po. Kinikilig ako. Ako po pala si Albert Raquenyor from UP College of Fine Arts. Una sa lahat, bilang Gen Z na iniiwasan mag-cellphone at mag-TikTok, kumaldag, mag-ting-ting-tang, ganon. I'm very grateful for the existence of this book kasi I'm also very passionate about teaching in the future and continuing the fight that we are trying to overcome right now. Kaya salamat po dahil meron kaming bagong citation. Charot. Question ko po talaga ay medyo light lang. Like, now that you're here, now that you have this book, I'm sure you've gone through a lot. What would you like to tell to your younger self?
Oy.
My younger self.
You're young.
Wow.
Parang ang young mo pa. Sige. 7 years old yata yun.
Baka may magic salamin na biglang lumabas dito sa tabi ko. Pero I thank you so much, Albert. First time ko po ma-meet si Albert face to face. Pero ang ganda ng cover na ginawa niya. Pinagtulungan namin itong concept na to. And actually, suggestion din ng Ateneo Press kasi maraming mga various versions nito. Pero we opted for a younger look, parang a grittier look na parang, as in, not your usual, parang siyang lakas maka young adult fiction novel, di ba? Yung cover niya. So I think that's part and parcel of the effort to reach out to a younger audience talaga. So we have Albert to thank for the beautiful cover. Ayan. So, to my younger self, actually, unfortunately, hindi ako ganun nga ka-politically woke or active or hindi ako talagang nakikibalita sa news when I was a lot younger. Na parang, even dito sa UP School of Economics, when I was an undergrad, wala akong org na econ-based. Hindi ako active sa student government. Talagang I kept to myself. I was a very boring undergrad student. Pero ayun, siguro I would tell my younger self to be a lot more active or parang mas makibalita or mas makialam sa mga social issues na siguro if I had started earlier and parang I'm playing catch up na parang ngayon na lang naman ako nagiging talagang involved in many of these discussions. So siguro that's some advice as well for the younger generations na mas makialam sa mga nangyayari sa current events. And siguro an invitation as well to the parents of these young people and educators as well, na wag nating i-inhibit or wag nating pigilan yung mga younger people from trying to engage in these public discussions and speak out. I guess moving forward, that's an important skill to develop, to hone at an early age, to start them young. And certainly, I hope I had that much earlier. Yun lang. Thank you, Albert.
Okay, maraming salamat. Meron pa actually mga tanong online pero hindi na natin ma-entertain. Ibibigay na lang namin kay JC and maybe he can answer them directly. No, kasi marami pa actually mga nagtatanong. And we really appreciate the fact that so many people are interested and would like to know more about the book and also about JC's younger self. But at this point, maybe JC, final words before we proceed? So many people are interested and would like to know more about the book and also about...
Ayan, I just wanted to thank you so much to everyone for attending this afternoon's book launch. This book is really the product of so many conversations and a lot of work over the past 7 years. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank many of the people who are quite instrumental, and many of these are in the room right now. First and foremost, a million thanks to Professor Noel de Jos for inspiring me to think about these issues in the first place, as well as Prof. Corina Bautista, with whom meron kaming paper, the Martial Law and the Philippine Economy, na is really quite successful as a discussion paper and made the rounds talaga. So thank you, Sir Noel. Next, I want to thank Sir Chuck Crisanto, yung nakayelo po dyan sa gilid. He's the director of the Human Rights Violations Victims Memorial Commission. Sila po yung magtatayo ng Martial Law Museum within the campus. So that's something exciting to look forward to. And over the past years, actually, Sir Chuck has been roping me in dun sa marami sa mga... We've been going around the country to educators and students about martial economics. So, ang dami kong natutunan. A huge portion of this book owes to those conversations with Sir Chuck as well as the team with the Memorial Commission. So, thank you, Sir Chuck. Next, I want to thank Tina Bawagan, former co-teacher of my mom sa Philippine Science High School main campus. Tita Tina, nandito ka ba? So, ayan. As well as Mel Cardenas of D1 ng Martial Law and Pisay Never Again. As well as the late Susan Kim po, yung mga tao behind the Martial Law Chronicles Project. I thank as well yung Rappler family ko, Chay Hofilenia, may long-time editor sa Rappler, Glenda Gloria, Beth Frondoso, and Maria Reza herself, who gave a lot of support for this book. And Maria actually provided a blurb dun sa likod ng book. So yung pinakataas dito, siya yung may sulat yan. Okay, so I think as well, Usapang Econ, Jeff and Cherry, taas kamay. So yan yung mga colleagues ko sa Usapang Econ, and we have some friends from Puma Podcast as well. We did that martial law economics episode sa Puma Podcast. So if you don't, or you're limited, you have limited time to read the book, a nice summary would be in that podcast with Puma Podcast. And then of course, I think my parents, my mom Aurora is here. Mami, tayo ka. With her, actually, itong book na to, ang daming versions nito na yung mami ko minsan papasok ko sa kwarto niya, nahuli ko siya na ini-edit ito late in the night. So, many of the, talagang very thorough na parang kala ko, ayos na yung sulat ko, ang dami pa palang namimiss. And my mom with her lawyerly attention to detail is quite instrumental. Kaya hindi marami yung mistakes sa book na to. Maayos, pulido tong librong to dahil sa mom ko. And then my dad as well, who peacefully passed away in 2021 on September 23, 2021. Dapat may talk ako nun on martial economics, pero that's the day he died. He imparted in me that parang interest in politics and history. So I owe him a lot as well. And then my boyfriend, Menji, is here. Nasaan ka? Yan. So nakita niya, saksi siya sa lahat ng late nights ko sa paggawa ng librong to. And yan, of course, napaka-inspired ko dahil sa kanya. yung papa ko ay dapat he's coming from Bacolod right now. It's his first time in the Philippines in a long time, and hahabol sila sa book launch later. And my tita Mia, they came all the way from LA. Yung house help namin, si Ate Jo Tabago, katabi ng mom ko, meron siya dito, nababanggit siya sa libro. Kinuwento niya yung experience niya during the Negros Island famine. She was there, and yun, nababanggit. Thank you, Ate Jo. So shout out as well sa family ko, ano, sa mga galing Canada, Jamie, yung mga merong bata dito, yan si Layden. Yan, so they're visiting from Canada and they're leaving quite soon. So thank you for coming. Ano pa to? Of course, Director Karina Bulasco of the Ateneo Press for the faith in my first ever book, ano, as well as to our excellent staff sa Ateneo Press. Very efficient, very professional. Sila Ace, sila Julian, si Almira, si Jerome, and then si Albert as well, who of course created the cover art, the splendid cover art. And then to Dean Joy Abrenica of the UP School of Economics. Muntik nang hindi matuloy yung book launch na to, pero she insisted. She insisted na matuloy ito, and thank you so much, Dean, for the support. And of course, the team of Tita Rose, yung katabi ni Dean, si Tita Rose and her team sa Public Affairs Office ng UPSE. This launch wouldn't be possible without them. Ayan, so I think as well, of course, my colleagues sa faculty ng UP School of Economics, marami sa kanila nandito, and to my students. And then to the speakers, of course, Sir Noel, si Mama Marites, and then si Mona. Thank you so much. Si Mona, very short notice, ano, pero talagang nandito si Mona to support. So thank you so much. Ayan, of course, Ogie, my dear friend Ogie Arsenas, na previously faculty member dito, and now nagtathrive sa UPLB. Pero he came all the way from LB with buko pie in tow. May dala siya dyan. Nagpakain siya ng buko pie kanina. So yes, thank you so much. And then of course the other blurb writers, ano, apart from Marites, si Prof. Solita Monsod, siya yung unang blurb dito sa unang page ng libro, and then si Attorney Chel Jokno as well. And then finally, let me thank the countless people with whom I've exchanged ideas and views. Teachers, students, human rights advocates, historians, and so many others. Talagang na-enrich yung book because of all of those conversations. And then to everyone who attended the book launch, thank you so much.
Maraming salamat, JC. Mamaya po, ipopost yung instructions if you'd like to buy a copy of the book and then have him a book signing later on. Pero ipopost daw mamaya yung instructions on yung proseso. Bago po tayo magpatuloy, tinatawagan ko po dito sa stage si message from the Ateneo University Press. No? So we would like to hear from the publisher of the book from Ateneo University Press, the director, Ms. Karina Velasco. We would like to hear from the publisher of the book from Ateneo University Press, the director, Ms. Karina Velasco.
Good afternoon. It was actually in October 2021 when JC showed me the sample first chapter of this book we are launching today. I was in fact ecstatic that it was in Filipino. I mean, not it in as his desire to be more widely accessible and to connect to the larger masses. But it read like a literal translation from what obviously was first thought of in English. So I recommended shifting back to the language he's comfortable in and let translators do the work later. I also suggested he gave each myth a chapter to be able to break it down in long form using not just internationally sourced data, user-friendly graphs and tables and charts, and whatever helpful and attractive visuals for young readers, but also anecdotes. And certainly it was not lost on us at the University Press how timely and precious it is that with this book, we have a millennial clearly speaking to other millennials, a next generation scholar, tech savvy, and comfortably uses social media platforms to engage with his own generation. Uh, from Noel's intro, he describes JC, and I quote, as part of an emerging generation of academics who are remarkably just as nimble in the trenches of social media as in the rarefied atmosphere of academic discourse. This week, we released 3 books, 2 new and printed, and the third, a digital edition of a 37-year-old book. On Monday, it had to be postponed because it's a national holiday today. So on Tuesday, it was martial law in the Philippines, lessons and legacies, 1972 to 2022, and today, false nostalgia, the Marcos Golden Age myths and how to debunk them. And as I said on Monday, a digital edition of the People Power book and eyewitness history. So over the years, we have built an arsenal of well-researched, well-documented, and richly analyzed events and aspects, victims and survivors and players and enablers of the Marcos martial law. Our hope is people holding the line and fighting the disinformation and historical distortion will use these books as solid references for fact, truths. The challenge has been and will always be how to use these books, translate them into more popular cultural forms, wider public to engage with and appreciate. So, as Mary was saying, asking earlier, they have to be translated to the different Philippine languages. But I think, you know, NGOs and other organizations, I'm sure there are officers or, you know, of the NGOs, the leaders. This is very simple writing from JC's book, and it should be easy to translate it right away to something like, I don't know, maybe street theater or used for training sessions or whatever, but already translated to the language, no? And the content translated to something more simple and more engaging and maybe humorous also, no? Because we hope all these books can be used as base material for film, theater, songs or poetry, rap, recipes, parody of prayers. There's so many things that different people are doing in different regions. Like in Naga, they parody prayers for political causes, no? For political, when they fight disinformation. Same for recipes. I mean, I've heard on social media people talking about a recipe, how to cook, but would make comments like, dagdagan ng sili, kasing anghang, ni ganito, ni ganyan, no? Yung ganyan, no? So, there are many ways, and we hope we will be as creative as we are diverse. You have dance, mime, puppetry. I hope we can have more monas, you know, using all this material. So we can only do or go so far as a university press. We do this first layer. This is the arsenal, this is the basis. These are all source books for everybody to use and translate into more popular cultural forms, or whatever it is that reaches an audience. We were, in fact, fascinated to hear a theater group's plan to turn parts of Some Are Smarter Than Others into a play. You know? So that's something to look forward to. That's going to be very difficult to do, right? And podcasters who just, you know, read sections of Conjugal Dictatorship during the 50th anniversary of martial law last September. So may our books and anthologies inspire a myriad other related projects, whether they be textbooks, graphic novels, or comics, or even children's books from these materials. No? Otherwise, scholarship as bred and shaped by universities has failed our people and our nation. It would have dismally failed to organize a critical mass who will improve the quality of life of all Filipinos and not just the quality of their hope. So thank you to the UP School of Economics for organizing this launch of your very own young and next, like JC Punong Bayan, whose false nostalgia is the perfect, most purposeful first book. Again, congratulations, JC, and may this book and we live up to its fullest potential. Thank you.
So maraming salamat po kay Miss Karina Blasco. I asked her to stay on stage kasi we're going to have the formal turnover of the book. So may I call on the Department Chair of the UP School of Economics, Professor Carl Handok, and the College Librarian of the school, si Faye Labiano, and to accept the book on behalf of the School of Economics. Professor Carl Handok and the College Librarian of the school, also known as Photo Op. And to accept the book on behalf of the School of Economics. Ayan, all right. So, obviously po hindi ito na-rehearse. So, ayan, all right. So, ayan. Obviously po hindi ito na-rehearse. Okay, marami. So, uulitin niyo uli yan 4 times kasi 4 volumes ito. Okay, at this point, salamat Carl and Ms. Bolasco and Faye and of course si JC. So from the book, no, so final activity natin po for today. We're almost done. The book launch is done, but now we're going to have the unveiling of a painting that's being donated to the school. Isinama na ho namin dito kasi mas popular si JC kesa dun sa painting. Kaya, so inisip namin may audience pa. So please join us in witnessing the unveiling, or more aptly said, unwrapping of the generous donation to the school of a painting by Miss Patricia Coseteng. This is a digital artwork titled Daluyong, created by respected artist Mark Justiniani. So it's, ayun po sila, no? So that is our donor, Ms. Patricia Coseteng, and Dr. Renato Reside, who is the director for the research department of the UP School of Economics. So meron po tayong countdown. Let the countdown begin. Our donor, Ms. Patricia Coseteng, and Dr. Renato Reside, who is the director for the research department of the UP. Hindi rin sila naka-rehearse. Ha? Countdown, ako na lang ang bibilang. Okay. Ayan na pala. Ayan, o sige. 1, 2, 3. Go. Ayan. Thank you, Trisha and Renato. To tell us more about the painting, we're happy to have the artist, Mark Justiniani, who rearranged his schedule to accommodate this afternoon's event. So, Mark, thank you, and please join me here on stage. Is Mark here? Yes. Thank you. Hindi alam ni Mark, dormmate ko siya nun. So, Mark, thank you, and please join me here on stage. Is Mark here? Yes. Thank you. Hindi alam ni Mark, dormmate ko siya nun.
Thank you. Congratulations, JC, for your book, and maraming salamat at sinulat mo yun. Maraming salamat sa School of Economics for hanging this work, and Tricia, maraming salamat din. Ang title ng work ay Daluyong. Daluyong was made during the campaign period for the last presidential elections. It was created on an iPad using an app called Procreate. This piece is artworks I've created on a digital tablet, which aside from its many uses, has the capacity to mimic various drawing and painting mediums. It can imitate the look of ink, graphite, charcoal, colored pencils, watercolors, oils, acrylics, brushes, airbrushes, smudges, and many other mediums, tools, and effects, all achievable with the use of one digital pen and a tablet. The medium is non-material. The image is drawn in light, minuscule projections of pixelated light that combine to form the artwork. The final image may then be printed on paper and all sorts of surfaces, like wood, canvas, or tarpaulin. Transferring the piece to a material surface makes it tangible, and we now see it translated from projected to reflected light. The Luyong is a limited edition of prints on archival paper. Although unlike the traditional printmaking processes, I could have this printed thousands or hundreds of thousands of times without losing the quality of the print. Light pixels are not subject to wear and tear and do not deteriorate. We have entered the age of great mimicry and endless replication. What we gain from new technology is immense. What we are giving up may be subtle, but it could be a lot. From the point of contact between the digital pen and the screen, we lose direct connection with the source material. What we get are simulated effects. The sensory engagement evens out and flattens the rendering experience. To add, one has the unlimited capacity to make corrections. The device has made it easy to erase mistakes. It has lessened its consequences. This takes away the need for precision. The artist no longer has to be accountable for each stroke. It may be practical, but I do not know if ultimately it is good. We may be compromising discipline, practice, attention, and patience. We might lose the mastery of skillful rendition. Lenny Robredo was my dorm mate in Kalayaan Residence Hall in 1982. We voted for her during the last presidential elections. It took almost 40 years before I would meet her again. In 2022, we were of the same generation, and we have been following the same national narrative. Our vantage point and perspective is not that far apart. We play our individual roles in the shared narrative. Lenny's role, of course, is a very prominent one, but now this story is being erased, revised, replicated, and disseminated through screens of our computers and tablets and cell phones. What happens to the role of the narrative now that it is being used in the service of fabricated truths? This has never been done at such a scale, circulating stories at light speed. The one who can disseminate the most is the one who would dominate. The Luyong shows a young leader headed towards an upcoming storm. The seal of the presidency is dismantled into fragments by powerful winds, along with broken scales of justice that the leader catches in her hand. With a questioning but resolute gaze, she heads forward, accompanied by legions who take part in doing the impossible task of staying afloat, performing this miracle of engaging and acting in unison in a fast-changing and much divided world. We are in the age of deception. A new and faster medium connects us all. But what is it doing to the quality of our encounters with each other? Are we evolving fast enough to cope with the rate of change brought about by these technological advancements? We struggle to retain the values that make us who we are, but we are compelled to adapt, to act quickly, so as not to be left behind by the times. Can we retain the values and practices that define us as humans as we all engage with each other using this new medium of light. Salamat po.
Maraming salamat, Mark. That was a really moving. I wasn't expecting it to be that moving, but it was. The last time I saw Mark was when we were still in the dorms, no? So, yung nasa Molave pa. Ang tagal na nun. So it's good to see you. With that, I'd like to thank Mark for the collection of the painting in the school. It's going to be one of the precious treasures of the school. And we're very proud that we pa rin. We are proud to have to now own the Luyong, and it's going to be part of the collection of the School of Economics. Again, maraming salamat kay Tricia and kay Mark. Okay, with that, we thank everyone for sharing the afternoon with us. We would like to inform you of the future events of the school and hoping that you can also join the school there. Dr. William Easterly from the New York University is coming to the Philippines to give an interesting lecture on the paradox of foreign aid and donor self-interest. This is going to be on May 9, 2023, 3 p.m. here at the School of UPSC Auditorium as well. So following closely is a series of lectures from former NEDA Directors General, starting with the first NEDA DG, Dr. Gerardo Sicat. And every month po, magkakaroon ng talk yung mga former NEDA Directors General. So this will be interesting. No? So from Winnie Monsod, Chel Abito, Felipe Medalla, and so on. No? So every month po yan from May to December of this year. So this is going to be done to help celebrate the Philippine Center for Economic Development's 50th anniversary. Kasi mag 50th anniversary na po ang PCED. Ito po ay PCED Auditorium. The building was donated by PCED as well. So we have an exit survey. Gobyerno po ito. So ang gobyerno po laging may exit survey. Kasama po yan sa kanilang PBB. Yung kanilang performance bonus. So please sagutin niyo po ang exit survey. Kailangan po yon para naman po ang staff ay magka-bonus. So we have the exit survey. There's a QR code posted on the screen. Ayan. And they will appreciate your feedback. All right. So we invite everyone to join us in the book signing at in the auditorium. And also, I understand the books are available for sale at the auditorium lobby. So please buy. Do not photocopy. We invite everyone also to refreshments at the auditorium lobby. So with that, maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat sa pagdalo ngayon.
10% discount daw to you. 10% discount.
May 10% discount daw po pag bibili ng libro. So bumili ho kayo ng today lang daw. Bumili kayo ng 10 para 100%.